Two Minds. Episode 2. The Cost of Effort. Listen. 5, 2, 9, 4. Add 1 to each digit. Say the result aloud. Stay in rhythm. 6, 3, 0, 5. If you tried, you felt it. The narrowing. The strain of holding one number while transforming the next. The sense that your mind had become a small room with too many objects in it. If you did not try, if you let the numbers pass through you, that is also important, because the part of you that chose not to try is the subject of this episode. In the last episode, you learned that your mind runs two systems. One is fast, automatic, and always on. The other is slow, deliberate, and capable of checking the first. This episode is about a question the first episode left unanswered. What does the slow system cost? A hospital corridor. The same 2 doors. But this time, look at the chart in the doctor's hand. Numbers. A graph. A percentage she is not absorbed. Her pupil is already dilated, fully, unmistakably. She has been working. In the early 1960s, a young psychologist named Daniel Kahneman was looking for a way to see thought happen. Not to measure what people think. Not to ask them what they remember or believe. To watch the physical event of thinking, in real time, in the body, without the thinker's knowledge. He read an article by the psychologist Eckhart Hess, who had noticed something about the pupil. Hess reported that pupils dilate when a person looks at something interesting. Wider for attractive faces, narrower for unpleasant ones. Kahneman had a different idea. What if the pupil responded not to interest, but to effort? He recruited a graduate student named Jackson Beatty, and together they built a setup like an optician's exam room. The subject leaned into a chin rest. A camera photographed the eye every second. An infrared flash illuminated the pupil without the subject knowing. And from the next room, through a closed-circuit camera, Kahneman watched. The task was the one you just heard. 4 digits. Add 1. Report the answer in rhythm. As each digit was processed, the pupil widened. With every step, hold the previous digit. Transform the current one. Prepare for the next. The dark circle at the center of the eye grew larger. By the 4th digit, the moment of maximum cognitive load, the pupil had dilated by nearly 50%. The iris was visibly compressed, the face was tense, the body was still. And then the subject spoke the answer. And in the space of a single breath, the pupil contracted. The effort was over. And the eye, the body, showed it before the mind even knew it had stopped working. When Kahneman and Beatty plotted the data, a shape emerged. It was the same every time. With every subject. With every task. Effort builds, it peaks, and then it falls. The shape was an inverted V. The rise was slow. The fall was fast. And the peak, the point where the most information was being held, transformed, and managed simultaneously, was the moment the body was working hardest. But there was something else. When the task exceeded the subject's capacity, when there were too many digits, too much to hold, the pupil did not keep dilating. It stopped. And then it shrank. The subject had given up. Not in words. Not with a signal. The eyes simply closed the aperture. Kahneman later described a scene that became one of the defining images of his career. He and Beatty would stand in the corridor, watching the projected pupil on the screen, while the subject worked in the next room. They could hear the metronome. They could see the dilation. And sometimes, in the middle of a mental multiplication or an ADD3 sequence, they would see the pupil suddenly contract. They would lean toward the intercom and ask, "Why did you stop working just now?" The answer, from inside the lab, was always the same. "How did you know?" To which they would reply, "We have a window to your soul." Kahneman made another discovery during the breaks between tasks. He was watching a subject's pupil during a casual conversation. No task, no pressure, just ordinary talk. And he was surprised by what he saw. Nothing. The pupil barely moved. The mundane exchange, listening, speaking, reacting, required almost no measurable effort at all. This was a eureka moment. The tasks they had chosen for study, ADD3, mental multiplication, were not typical of mental life. They were the extreme, the ceiling. Most of the time, the mind is not sprinting. It is strolling. Kahneman used the metaphor of his own daily walk through the Berkeley Hills. At 17 minutes per mile, a comfortable stroll, he could think freely. His mind wandered. He composed arguments. He solved problems. But when he accelerated, pushed toward 14 minutes per mile, something changed. His ability to think coherently degraded. At the fastest speed he could sustain, he could not think at all. Every resource was consumed by the act of moving. Self-control and deliberate thought draw on the same limited capacity. If you are using all of it to walk fast, there is nothing left for thinking. If you are using all of it to think hard, there is nothing left for self-control. This is not a metaphor. This is the architecture. In the economy of the mind, effort is a cost. And the mind, like any efficient system, gravitates toward the cheapest option. This is called the law of least effort. It governs not just physical action, but thought itself. As you become skilled at a task, its demand for energy diminishes. The brain recruits fewer regions. The pupil dilates less. Talent works the same way. Highly intelligent individuals need less effort to solve the same problem. The implication is uncomfortable. Laziness is not a moral failing. It is an engineering feature. The system is designed to conserve effort wherever it can. And when effort has a price, the mind will always ask, is the answer I already have good enough? Usually, the answer is yes. In the 1990s, the psychologist Roy Baumeister designed a series of experiments to test what happens when the budget runs out. In one experiment, subjects sat at a table with two options in front of them: a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies, warm and fragrant, and a bowl of radishes. One group was told to eat the cookies. The other was told to eat only the radishes and to resist the cookies entirely. Afterward, both groups were given a difficult puzzle. The subjects who had resisted the cookies gave up significantly sooner. The act of self-control, of overriding the urge to eat the cookies, had depleted something. The budget was spent. Baumeister found the same pattern across settings: suppressing emotion, resisting temptation, making difficult choices. Each act of voluntary effort, cognitive, emotional, physical, appeared to draw from the same limited pool. He called it ego-depletion. This finding was reported in dozens of studies. It became one of the most influential ideas in psychology, and it was one of the ideas that did not survive the replication crisis intact. In 2016, 23 laboratories across the world attempted to reproduce the core ego-depletion effect using a pre-registered protocol. They found, collectively, that the effect was either absent or far smaller than originally claimed. The debate continues. Baumeister has argued that the replication protocols differed from his originals. Other researchers have proposed alternative explanations: not a drained reservoir, but a shift in motivation, a change in what the mind decides is worth the effort. What is not in dispute is the broader observation. Mental effort is expensive. Cognitive load, being asked to hold too much in mind, makes people more impulsive, more suggestible, and more willing to follow the default. When the part of you that checks is occupied, the part of you that guesses takes over. A psychologist once described this with a phrase that has stayed with me. System 1 has more influence on behavior when System 2 is busy. And it has a sweet tooth. This is where the story of effort connects to a story about method. In episode 1, you met Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, two psychologists who began collaborating in 1969 at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Their method was unusual. They spent hours each day in conversation, inventing problems, testing them on each other, walking through the streets of Jerusalem at a pace that allowed thought to flow. Kahneman later wrote, "I did the best thinking of my life on leisurely walks with Amos." That is not a sentimental observation. It is a statement about the law of least effort. The walking pace that allows thought is the strolling pace, the pace that leaves the budget intact. Walk faster, and the thinking degrades. Sit still too long, and restlessness drains the same resources. The walk was not an accessory to their method. It was the method. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi has a name for what happens when effort sustains itself without willpower, when the work is absorbing enough that self-control is unnecessary. He calls it flow. Flow is the exception to the depletion rule. It proves that sustained concentration is possible, but only when the task itself provides the motivation. When the motivation must come from willpower, the budget starts draining. Kahneman and Tversky may have spent 14 years in flow. Most of us are not so fortunate. In 2011, researchers published a study of over 1,000 parole decisions made by 8 Israeli judges over a 10-month period. The cases were presented throughout the day. Each hearing lasted an average of 6 minutes. The default decision, the one that required no written justification, no departure from the status quo, was denial. The researchers were looking for patterns. They found one. At the start of each session, just after a meal break, judges approved parole roughly 65% of the time. As the session wore on, the approval rate dropped. It dropped steadily, predictably, towards zero. After a meal break, it reset, back to 65%. After lunch, the same pattern. The shape of this graph is called a sawtooth wave. It is the shape of depletion. The sharp drops are the cost of decision after decision without rest. The sharp recoveries are the cost of a meal. Denial required nothing. The judge could deny parole by writing nothing, explaining nothing, changing nothing. It was the path of least resistance. Approval required engagement, reading the case, weighing the arguments, accepting responsibility for a decision that could go wrong. Each approval was an act of System 2. And by the end of each session, System 2, or whatever we want to call the capacity that makes careful decisions possible, had been spent. This study has been questioned. Some researchers have argued that the pattern may not be caused by fatigue alone. The order in which cases were heard, whether simpler cases clustered early in each session, may play a role. The strategies of defense attorneys, who might schedule their strongest cases after breaks, could contribute. The debate is ongoing. The effect is large, suspiciously large, some say, and the mechanisms are not fully resolved. But what is not in dispute is this: the quality of a decision can depend on when the decision is made, not on the facts, not on the law, not on the merits of the case, on the time of day and the contents of a meal. And the judges did not know. They believed they were evaluating each case on its merits. They were not aware that something in them, something measured not in arguments but in hours since the last break, was shifting the calculus toward the easier answer. They were blind to the machinery, and the machinery kept running. The pupil is a record, not of what you know, but of what you spent. Every decision you make has a price. And the decisions you make when the price has already been paid, when the budget is empty and the machinery has no fuel left for checking, those decisions are still decisions. They still feel considered, but they are not the same. In this episode, you learned what effort costs. The pupil widens. The body pays. And when payment is exhausted, the slow system stops checking, and the fast system, the one that was never tired, takes over. But fatigue is not the only way System 1 shapes your reality. Even now, rested, alert, paying attention, the fast system is doing something you cannot see. It is associating, linking words to emotions, faces to judgments, and experiences to stories you never asked it to write. Bananas, vomit. Something just happened in your body. You did not choose it. And the machine that made it happen is the subject of episode 3.